Hi, welcome to EDSC 561, and this is Crisis Prevention and Intervention. It's week 4. This week, you do have one assignment. Your The assignment that is due this week is your risk assessment practices and procedures, and you will have one discussion board that is also due this week. This week, we're going to be talking about chapters 6 and 7, and we will be going over um, in chapter 6, prevention, protection, mitigation, and response to violence. And in chapter 7, we will be going over um, prevention, protection, and mitigation for disasters. So those are the topics that we're discussing this week. All right, so I'm going to be sharing my screen with you as we begin. With those chapters. Okay, so in chapter 6, like I said, we're talking about prevention, protection, mitigation, and response to violence. So our school safety plan is an overview. It requires a school climate, organization, environmental design. We need to know about our school site. Each school site, we have old schools, and a lot of times what comes out from the different recommendations is not easy for schools to make those changes as quickly as possible. So we'll go through some of the changes that have occurred after various shootings in different states, and we'll see if our schools particularly will live up to some of the recommendations, because sometimes changing all of that out can be costly, especially since Sandy Hook, when the recommendations were made, there have been other disasters like COVID and other things that we had to face. All right. So we have to have our security measures, universal, targeted, intensive programs and services for students. It needs to be competent, and we need to have a competent and timely threat assessment. We need to have effective school crisis responses to threatening situations, and we need to make sure that we always include support for our victims and our witnesses. So, our school safety plan, which is what you'll be bringing to our class week 5, and you'll be writing about that in your week 8 signature assignments. You're going to be reviewing a comprehensive school safety plan, something that I shared with the class at the beginning of week 1, the one that we have for our district. And in this, the district has come together and created areas, and then the site principal will update the areas that pertain specifically to the site. Sometimes maybe the reunification area has been designated down the street or at a park in the city. And if that park is no longer there or it's not safe, we would need to change that. So those are things that have to continuously be discussed. As we've noticed some in for school districts here, as we faced some changes, we had fires in the Los Angeles School District as well as the Pasadena Unified School District. So some of their safety plans obviously will have to be changed this school year as they are rebuilding those schools and reopening some of the schools. We need to raise awareness and responsibility of students and teachers and parents regarding the types of violence that are occurring in the schools. It's important for the parents to be aware and that we have protocols in place to make the kids safe. Some examples of potential violences in school are sexual harassment, biting, weapon use, etc. We need to make sure that we have clear guidelines and rules for all members of the community. Due to some of the situations that have been occurring in our district, we adopted and we were required to adopt this through our insurance policy, the no-go. And I'll share that with you in a bit. We also need to have targeted various social systems in the school and clear communication to the entire school community on what procedures should be followed before, during, and after any violent events. We need to focus on getting the school staff, students, and parents involved in the programming. So this should occur at your PTOs, your coffee with the principals, your ELAC and DLAC meetings. This is where we have committees that involve the parents, and so we can get that parent participation. Sometimes we leave out the community, and they can provide extra resources for us, as well as help and responsibility. So we pair up with our Hawthorne Police Department. We pair up with, we do CERT training for the city. There's many school employees that have done the city CERT training, certified emergency response team. And so, having that extra background, knowing what the city will do in an earthquake, a fire, or a major situation also allows that person to be fully prepared if as an employee of the school district. We need to focus on getting a normal flow and a mission for the school setting. So when we have a review of our comprehensive school-wide plan, we need to use faculty, parents, and staff in the school setting to plan, implement, and sustain the program. So how are we doing that? Are we doing that with training? How are we informing our parents? Because as we know, and what history shows us, is that practice is what helps us to be able to respond quickly, efficiently in these crises. Because sometimes just waiting makes the situation have more deaths or harm than it needs to be. We need to make sure we are increasing our monitoring and our supervision in our non-classroom areas. And we need to make sure we also have ongoing monitoring and mapping that can be tailored to the specific needs and increase chances of success. All right. So the National Center for Education Statistics, we use this when we kind of look at our suicide risk assessment and how many homicides, suicides, what is the third leading cause? Is it increasing or decreasing? The National Center for Education Statistics takes care of all of that for us. And we kind of include that in our annual meetings and trainings so that people realize that it is increasing, if there is an increase, and if it's decreasing, why? And so that we can continue to get that decrease if it's occurring. Assessing school-related violence, we need to make sure that we have safety and engagement environment. The Colorado School Safety Resource Center has assisted many educators in its emergency response team. So this is one of the ones that you would go to if your district does not have something. You might want to keep this on hand, especially if your district is lacking resources to review policy and procedures and to get that information out as quickly as possible. So we need school-wide interventions, such as mentoring programs for these types of violences. The mentoring programs help to keep the students emotionally safe and socially and emotionally safe, and knowing how to regulate those emotions so that they don't have responses that could cause danger, or we can kind of decrease that. Social emotional learning lessons. This is where we're going and teaching about our emotions and how to manage them so that they don't affect our lives. We need a multi-tiered support, mostly multi-tiered systems of support. We're rolling out ours this year. And so we're at the stage where we have done it in a leadership process over the last 2 years. And now we're rolling out to the rest of the staff so that everybody is aware of this district has these support systems in place to support you academically, physically, emotionally, and so, right? We have our PBIS, which helps us to kind of move away from that punishment um, that we had in the past, where if a student did something wrong, they received a consequence. That consequence was usually some sort of punishment. Now we're stating we want to focus on the positive behaviors, not that we do not give out consequences. Consequences will still occur, but what type of consequences will occur? An example of that is restorative practices. Restorative practices brings in the concept of, okay, the student has done something to and harmed others, physically, emotionally, whatever. They're going to do a report on how it made those people feel by asking 4 questions. When we ask those 4 questions, they can do a drawing, they can do a PowerPoint, depending on their age. And then they have to go back and share that information in a restorative circle. In that circle, we talk about, we prep the students so that the students can ask the individual questions as to and share the feelings that they experienced when that student did that to them, whatever was the situation that occurred. So when you are doing that, that's the consequence. The consequence is that they had to do the report. However, they also get to learn about empathy. And they also get to learn, hey, I really hurt someone. And we recently had a story from one of our middle school deans who shared that a student had to participate in a peer mediation. And through that peer mediation, he listened and heard how his actions really, really hurt the girl. And he talked to the dean about it and thanked him for allowing him to participate in that peer mediation because he didn't realize how much his words harmed that individual. So that's success because now this person really has touched and connected with words do hurt. Um, and he's grown from there. Now, response to intervention is something that we are not doing anymore. California has an initiative and we took away response to intervention. The reason why we took away response to intervention is because it is reactive. What we want at this time is we want to make sure that we are proactive. And so our multi-tiered systems of support, our positive behavior intervention, our social emotional lessons, those are all proactive. So the physical aspects of school violence, how we can prevent this is through natural surveillance, making sure that um, we are looking at our physical features and maximizing visibility. Sometimes we're too open. In some states, we're just too open. And that kind of makes us a little bit more vulnerable. We do have buzzers on our doors at this time. That's something that I lived to see within this school district because before we went from open area to fencing to now we have actual locked doors at all times. We need to access management, which involves guiding people by using signs and marking entrances and exits and landscaping so that we are aware of our barriers and our limited access. And then what is the safest way to escape or leave the campus, right? We need to look at our territory and making sure of we're creating a welcoming environment as we continue to protect our students in our environment. We are 100% a closed campus. So all students and staff have to go through the front office. They also have to have ID upon entering the front office, even if they're coming on campus for a class or anything like that. So this is something that we, sometimes could be perceived as not welcoming because you have to always show your ID. And some people are maybe uncomfortable with that. We need to make sure we have maintenance at all times, like I expressed to you earlier, making sure that we're repairing things that are broken, that we have general upkeep of space, um, and that we make sure that minor unacceptable acts um, are attended to, that we provide measures that clearly state acceptable behavior. So that's what we do with our PBIS. Our PBIS tells us what are the expectations for the school when you're in the various environments? How do we want the students to behave? What does it look like? We have videos for that so that students are aware. So then when there's an emergency, students are able to respond quickly. As I talked about earlier, the Sandy Hook massacre led us to these recommendations that K-12 classrooms should be equipped with locked doors that can be locked from the inside by the classroom teacher or substitute teacher. We do not have that. However, we do have and have implemented steel locks because changing the doors was more costly than purchasing, and we purchased it with COVID money, this lock that goes in the floor of the door so that when someone pulls on it, they're unable to, if the door is not locked, they still can't get in. Exterior doors should be equipped with hardware capable of implementing a full perimeter lockdown. Okay, we have gates. So as we are aware in some of the preceding um, active shooters, many of them climbed a gate. That was the way to get in because the gate was locked. But if it's just an 8-foot gate, some people can get over that. Classrooms and other spaces of denser population occupancy should be locked away from the point of the building entry, and that spaces of lesser occupancy can be adjacent to school entry points without giving up human visual surveillance and situation awareness. That's that one little door that they can access by climbing over a fence from the street and then get into that door. So we want to make sure that, that's being monitored and that we can't have someone who can hide away there and then, activate a shooter situation. So additional tips are anticipate, anticipate, anticipate. We just need to be aware of things. So pay attention to the community. What is the community like? Our community, it tends to have a lot of activity and sometimes even more violence. So just being aware of that, like where you're parking your car. One of the first things that I always say, for our substitute teachers, where'd you park your car? Because we have gates that require a clicker to get into park in our parking area. Well, we don't want our substitute teachers' cars on the streets due to the different activity that we know that occurs. And they're like, oh, I parked down the street. No, it's not safe. Go get your car and then bring your car back in. We don't want them because that will make them not want to come back. We need to plan our exits. Every time you enter a room as a counselor, you need to know where you're standing. You need to know where the exit doors are. Because if you encounter a situation where a student is having a meltdown of some sort, you want to give them space that is non-threatening, but you also want to place yourself closest to the door so that you can escape if you're in the classroom alone with the student. Also, you want to place the student in an environment where the other students are safe. So we have evacuation procedures that we use often, and our teachers are familiar with it. And I'll say, go ahead and take the students out, and especially if the student that is having a crisis it begins to pick up items and throw things. We don't want anybody standing around, watching. And sometimes the audience creates more of a traumatic situation. So we want to make sure we get everyone else out safely. We can replace chairs, windows, doors, equipment, so if that gets broken, that's fine. What we can't replace is, parts of our bodies and things like that. So that's really important. We need to plan how we'll communicate the emergency. As we saw in one of the situations in our chapters, um, the crowd, the student, passed out through dehydration, but the crowd said that the student had gotten shot. That being passing out for dehydration is way different than a shooting, because a shooting is going to create mass chaos, right? Schedule a meeting that might be troublesome in a safer location. So, like if you have a parent on campus and you're having a meeting with them, they tend to get volatile, or anxious, and they're pacing. This is where we want to do this in the front office so that we can de-escalate quickly and have more hands on deck to contact, someone if it gets out of control. Study our own office, which is what I'm saying. Like whenever you go, I go into classrooms and do class lessons all the time. So it's important that as I go in there, which ones are different, which rooms are broken, what's happening, so that we're aware of that at all times. And learn how to de-escalate an agitated person. I take NCI training. It's every 2 years you get certified. And that book is very good at helping you just with the basics. The NCI training is for the restraints, but we don't focus on the restraints. The focus is on the de-escalation. The focus is on the stance. The focus is on those things, not the okay, we might need to restrain the student. That's the last resort. So everyone can use the de-escalation and agitation um, information. Okay, so security measures. This is about cyber security. So this is when you log on to this, it will take you to a government agency. So they're asking you to, be aware that you're entering a government agent website that is monitored by the government. So just know that as you are going into this particular, if you have some interest in security measures for security technology. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about threat assessments. And so, what is a threat assessment? A threat assessment is an expression of intent harm, to someone. This threat can be verbal, it could be gestured, it could be written or drawn, it could be direct or indirect. It could have a weapon possession in presumed to be a threat unless circumstances are clearly indicated otherwise, right? So an example of a direct threat would be, I'm going to stab you with a knife after school. An indirect threat would, I have the means to do some major destruction here. A third party, he's going to get what's coming to him. Wait and see. A conditional threat, you'd better change my grade or I'll kill you. An veiled threat, it's an indirect reference to a previous mass shooting or a violent event. So this is the one that people pay close attention to make sure that, are you starting to idolize these events, idolize the people who did the events, and wanting to mirror their behavior. All right. So once we get to a threat assessment, we need to have a threat assessment team attack. And it's a multidisciplinary team that includes normally the school administrator, the dean of students, mental health professionals, counselors sit on these committees, because quickly that person could want to cause harm to him or herself. And so then we would do a risk assessment, school resource officers, and our outside professionals. We also may put them on the list where they are seen by FBI and other people that go out to the home. It depends on the nature of the threat and if the student has access to weapons in the home. They'll go and um, the threat assessment team will go out to the home and take a look at those things. We need to understand the relevant laws, and we also need to make sure that we're doing training for threat assessment. So when we have peer bullying or peer harassment, we need to use our bullying prevention in our policy for bullying. Each district is required by law to have a policy for bullying and cyberbullying. So you need to know where that is located as well. So schools become safer when adults supervise by paying close attention. Do we have enough supervision? The answer is usually no, but this is where we have to bring this to the attention of the principal so the principal can manage that type of supervision. Sometimes if you have a bathroom off to the corner to avoid any type of sexual contact, no matter the age, and it can't be monitored during some other times, maybe we need to lock those bathrooms so that nothing can occur in those restrooms during the time when you have the least amount of supervision. So those are things to keep in mind. Okay. Um, we need to make sure that we follow our bullying prevention procedure. So once it's identified, are we notifying in the appropriate timeframes according to the policy and procedure? We need to make sure that we have an assessment of an unsafe and potentially unsafe situations. You should never just determine that I don't think he means it. I know the kid, I know the family. Now, your knowledge of the student and the family will play an important role as a team member, and you can guide that information, but never assume that you know anyone that well, because that isn't relevant. We never know what any individual will or won't do. Our own family members that we grew up with them, right? So, we're required to train staff annually for our bully prevention, just like our suicide prevention, just like our child abuse. All of that is an annual training for all staff. And we also need to make sure that families are aware. So how we can be successful with our bully prevention program and policy and procedure, you should have both, is enlisting the care of major students who are not involved in making sure that they're training and teaching other students. That's what you do through the programs. And then through the policy and procedure, you make sure that if there is a bullying situation, that you are following to the letter of what the policy and enforce the policy according to harassment and intimidation. So in an individual crisis response, here's some tips on how we can de-escalate any an unarmed individual who becomes hostile. We can, try to listen actively and try to make them feel heard so that they de-escalate. We don't want to threaten. We want to use a normal voice. We want to make sure that we're using our proximity and it's non-threatening. And we want to make sure we speak slowly and calmly. We can also, if we see someone perseverating or agitated, that we can distract them. Would you like to get a cup of coffee? Want some water? While they're waiting to see if they can, make sure that they don't get more upset, and offer them reasonable choices. We want to make sure we call them by their first name. This helps them to feel familiarized and that they're in a welcoming place so that they're aware. We don't want to, we want to really listen and do less talking. and not be so quick to talk about our policy and procedures, but, really hear and acknowledge their feelings. Okay. And like I said, don't stand over them, giving them that proximity, the non-threatening, you're off to the side so that they have an escape route or they don't feel like you're trying to intimidate them in any way. Um, we want to avoid the direct, consistent eye contact. So maybe kind of blinking, moving around, doing other things so that they don't feel threatened by that. The 3 feet of personal space, like we talked about, that's how we do proximity and non-threatening and making sure that we are, you know, distance away from any type of strike that could occur with either the arm or the foot. And then don't block doorways as well. Okay. So, how we have learned that from our school violence and addressing it is that we have to practice. We have to have different scenarios to practice. Um, don't assume that potential harm only comes from youth perpetrators. It can come from anywhere. We need to have a good crisis response plan that involves everyone, but doesn't rely totally on law enforcement. And we need to use crisis communications that are straightforward and will be understood by those unfamiliar with the building. So, your locations, like where are you located in the event that you are the communicator to the police department as to where the shooting is occurred? Do you know north, south, east, and west of your school? Where are you located? Are you located on the side near the front office? These are things that you communicate effectively to the police department to get you the quickest response. Spending time getting to know the community. If you have to leave the campus, do you want to walk into more danger or do you want to walk away from danger? So sometimes we have to leave the campus to keep people alive. I don't think anyone would be upset if we left the campus and we kept everybody together. We got away from the danger and then, reunified the families with their students safely and securely. We need to monitor our websites, making sure we have Blocksy. A lot of these things came about when we were using online. So we have methods, but are we still using them? Because we haven't taken away the computers from the students. And then we want to welcome our new students and we want to make sure that our new students are aware because they are new to the campus and they are the ones that will need support in the event something happens or goes wrong. Okay. Um, we need to also support our students after a violent incident. So, what are we going to do in terms of long-term consequences or post-traumatic stress disorder? So, do we have a counseling tool? And I'll share the counseling tool that was, which my district uses for trauma informed. So we want to look at the exposure and contact. Who was the closest to the incident? Was there direct exposure to the victims, witnesses, perpetrators, and suspects? Was it on site? Students, faculty, staff, parents, how many of them were affected? Was it off campus? On an absent day, something occurred. So we don't need to necessarily we need to support them because they have to return to school, but they're still feeling and experiencing the trauma. And then maybe out of the vicinity, friends at other nearby schools. That's happened too, where we've lost the life. And that student used to go to our school. However, so we know the family and we may have a younger sibling there, but it won't be the same as it being directly affected. Some of the students a lot of the students that knew that child probably no longer attend your school. We need to look at other risk factors, familiarity with the victim, previous trauma and loss. That can be a triggering point as well. Family response to psychotherapy. Is it a family dysfunction? And then individual psychotherapy, a history of previous dysfunction or exposure to violence. Um, so special considerations that happen after crime has been committed. This is a website that can assist with those things. Some additional tips: try to, reestablish normal routines as we come back from an incident or we are exposed to a traumatic incident. We need to heighten our supervision and surveillance. We sometimes forget, because they're adults, that the employees and families may need a lot of support too. We assume, oh, you weren't here, or it didn't happen near you, but it could be a triggering response for them, because maybe something happened to them in their lifetime. So maybe they're not able to function well in their job, and they're having a, response to the trauma. We need to heighten the visibility and security measures, including the police or security staff, until the threat ceases. All right. We need to provide families and staff with regular factual updates. So, how's everything going as we, you know, go through our new normal as a school and a community? How do we, you know, move past this situation? We have to pay close attention to those who attended any public information meetings, and that they aren't sharing information back that is not accurate potentially. And we need to keep in mind that threats may come from within the school district. All right. In chapter 7, we're talking about natural disasters. So these are the things that we don't have any control over. We don't have control over the violence either, but um, we need to be aware, prepared, and we need to make sure we take our children with special needs into consideration, because getting them to move, they may freeze, and we don't need them to freeze in a natural disaster. So, how are our external agencies involved? Well, there's our local government response, supplemented by our neighborhood communities and volunteer agencies. We have our state response with the state resources such as the National Guard and state agencies. And then we have a damage assessment by local, state, federal, and volunteer organizations that determine loss and recovery needs. Um, in the chain of events of a disaster, a major disaster is declared and requested by the governor. And based on the damages, and that is assessed, an agreement to commit state funds and resources to the long-term recovery of that particular damage. FEMA then evaluates the request and recommends an action to the White House based on the disaster, to the local communities, and the state ability to recover. And then the president approves the request, or FEMA informs the governor it has been denied. So the American Red Cross is obviously a national agency that helps us in supporting schools, communities, and includes the crisis counseling, client assistance, providing shelter, food, clothing, times, financial support, which will all be needed. We experienced this recently at schools with the fires, the natural fires that occurred in those two school districts. So at this time, this is what they're experiencing. And maybe housing is being given to them in a totally different city. They had to move to a completely different city until their city is restored. And they have things, not just their homes, but is there anything to eat? Are the roads open? Is it safe? There's a lot more going on there. Okay. And making sure that, how are the hospitals? Because if your local hospital was affected by the fire, I mean, how are you get medical attention? If you go back to your homes, because that time could affect you. The National Organization for Victims Assistance helps in the role of disasters and arrives in the immediate aftermath to provide mental health crisis consultation and coordination for 72 hours. And the National Child Trauma Stress Network will aid schools and field operation guides to assist children, adolescents, adults, families in the aftermath of a school crisis, disaster, or terrorism event. The National Association for School Psychologists provides free materials and help children and youth cope with traumatic and unsettling events. And the project Reassured, it offers easy read handouts for laypersons caring for children with or without disabilities in a disaster. So during that time, as we're recovering from that, we need to acknowledge and express and re-engage. So we need to express our feelings. So we need to have a way of doing that. Um, Students may not be ready to return directly to class, so they need to have a room where they can go and color and calm their bodies down. And because they'll have feelings throughout the day that might just come up, and we don't want them to go home, but we want to help them be able to deal with those feelings. We need to provide mental health and psychological support with children and families for 2 years after the disaster. We need to access family function and general coping processes for at least 6 years post wildfires. Then we need to provide additional services and resources for designated professionals. Okay. We need to offer free sessions addressing family decision making, family planning, and general recovery process. We need to encourage the parents to provide factual information to their children, spend time with them, promote conversations about their feelings, provide opportunities for children and families to enjoy themselves and support one another. So that increase in the school activities would be a great way to do that, because they're going to be kind of shy to go outside to other activities after traumatic event. They're going to be, nervous to going to other cities. So they feel safe at schools because we have these policies and procedures in place. And then that's where we can provide these activities so that they start to feel happy again. We want to move people from those uncomfortable feelings to those comfortable feelings. And they're going to go back and forth with them, but we want to make sure we have plenty of activities that keep them with the comfortable feelings. Some additional strategies for parents is allowing them to ride the bus for a couple of days if a bus is involved, and that helps with the separation anxiety. Greet parents and allow them to remain at the school for the first few days, and get parents and students involved in reconstructing and the school if the school has been relocated. We need to get parents involved in a memorial project to honor any of the deceased. Sponsor parent gatherings. One of the things we do, which is our annual thing, and it happens next Friday, is our family picnic. And we also have a loved ones picnic that occurs on Valentine's Day, or that Friday closest to Valentine's Day. This is ways that, because we're a K-5 school, these are ways that students can engage with their parents and introduce their parents to some of their friends on campus. Parents get to meet parents, but they also bring their favorite food and sit down and have like a mini picnic. It's not time consuming. So it's not all day. It's the 20 minutes of lunch that we have, and then the additional 20 minutes the students play. And that's when we're asking the parents, unless they have multiple kids on campus in different grade levels, we ask them to just go ahead and let them get back to their playing, because they need to get up and run around, but then that they can, go ahead and leave. So 20 minutes of your time to eat a lunch and check in with your family and see, the students on campus is a great thing. We need to have some typical reactions occur during disaster time. And so here's some books that will help us to go through some of those potential reactions and be able to provide and update our information on how we can support those students with those reactions. So also our outside agencies mental health agencies that we work with will also have a lot of support for us as well. And it probably even provide us with therapists that can come and sit on campus and kind of meet with other um, students who were part of that experience. I happen to have an outside um, agency called Dee Hirsch, and one of the therapists does art therapy. So she did a series of 3 courses with the parents last year just to help them kind of get through anxiety and stress. So in the event of a disaster, I would call on her and ask her to provide some of those art lessons to kind of heal as we move through any type of situation that we might have face a natural disaster, a threat, a violence on campus, anything like that. Okay, so that kind of covers the chapters for us. Now, what I'd like to do is begin talking about the Center for Resilience. And the Center for Resilience um, has a lot of different activities, and I want to share them with you, programs that they have. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again and kind of let you go through some of this. So you have to be trained in order to access these materials. And I have done that, been trained twice now, and our district has a resource with them. The CSET is a manual that the lessons are structured, and it's for PTSD. These are for therapists. So this one is for licensed therapists. So, and it's intended to be time limited, and it goes over the different types of um, lesson outlines. So there's 10 lessons, and this is helping them get through that traumatic experience. Bounce Back is their newest program that they created for the K-5 group. Again, focusing on trauma. And there's 2 parts to it. It is the therapeutic and the non-therapeutic. Obviously, the counselors use the non-therapeutic, and the our social workers use the therapeutic. The difference is there's individualized lessons also. So you do it in a small group, but then you also add individual lessons with the student as well as the parent, so that you're working collaboratively with all parties that were involved. So maybe the child has experienced post-traumatic stress, but disorder, but the families know how to support them as they go through it, and it gets explained to them. CBITS is the cognitive behavior intervention trauma for schools, and it also has a 10 session that talks about how to deal with loss and grief. So for community violence and domestic violence. And this one is used for the middle schools. So the two, Bounce Back and CBITS, kind of work together for students, middle school and up. This is 7 through 12. CBITS is 7 through 12. Bounce Back is K through 5. And obviously, as you can see, it is made for elementary students. I have used this. I used this last year because we were trained in this, and I used it with students from grades 1 to 4. So I take a look at their emotional ability, their cognitive ability, their ability to express. And sometimes, that helps. The activities in there are not extensive. So, reading, you can read to them, but as long as they're able to comprehend what you are saying, then they are able to respond and do the activities in there. And it helps because they're with others that are experiencing trauma. I usually keep no more than 6 in this group. They do have a screening process where they kind of want you to screen the whole campus and then pick out the groups. Do that. I haven't done that quite as yet. I started with just students that I know have been through a recent traumatic event and they are challenged with it. Okay. All right. So I wanted to kind of share those things with you because I know that that was one of the links that were provided during in the syllabus. Restorative practices, I want to talk about that again as it relates to PBIS and discipline. Um, we're not trying to be punitive. We're really just trying to give out consequences as needed, but really focusing on the positive parts of the behavior and getting students to mirror the positive behaviors and rewarding them and getting them accustomed to that. This concludes my week 4 um, instructor video. Thank you.